In the heart of the city which gave us the greatest band of them all is the underground cellar where it all began.
The Cavern was the making of the Beatles, and the Beatles were the making of the Cavern.
This is the story of the most famous club in the world.
As I walked towards the Cavern, the beat actually hit me in the heart.
An iconic venue whose fame couldn't save it from demolition.
I mean, you couldn't believe it. The Cavern would have been in America. It would have been a shrine.
A place where a host of legends have performed.
Playing the Cavern was quite special for us.
But whose name will always be best remembered as the birthplace of the Beatles.
To see the Beatles, it was just skull-shattering.
You could lean across and touch them.
We'd seen Elvis, but that was the movies, that was America, that was another world. This was ours, this was on our doorstep in my hometown.
February the 9th, 2011, marks the 50th anniversary of the day that a band with no record contract and not many fans pulled up into Liverpool's Matthew Street, gingerly descended the 18 steps into a sweaty, smelly cellar and played the Cavern for the very first time. Over the next 2.5 years, the Beatles would tread the cramped Cavern stage nearly 300 times. By the time they finally said goodbye to the place, Beatlemania had swept Britain and the Fab Four were about to conquer the planet.
We count ourselves lucky because for, 7 pence as it were, you could not only see the Beatles but hear them sing as well.
The Cavern is a crucial part of the legend of the 4 Liverpool lads who shook the world. But what was it like to witness history in the making?
I came down here and never seen anything like it in my life. I'm in town and, this is the den of iniquity, my mum used to call it.
It was hot and sweaty and very dark. I mean, you didn't have,
It was a death trap, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it was a sweaty place, but that's what rock and roll was about in those days. That's why we loved it.
The very first thing that would hit me when I went to the Cavern was probably the smell.
It was this mixture of rotting fruit from the warehouses above upstairs, urine from the toilets, which weren't the best in the world.
Smoke, the hot dogs, and the disinfectant they threw down the next day to get rid of the smell.
Whenever I think of the Cavern, I never think of how great the kids were, how good the sound wasn't. Mention the Cavern and I immediately think, nettle.
And the smell lingered on your clothes. You'd be on a bus going home and then somebody would get up and sit in front of you and you just go like that and you go, she's been the Cavern.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed.
The Cavern started out as a Victorian fruit warehouse and served as an air raid shelter during the war, before opening as a jazz club in 1957.
All these places have their moments.
The Quarrymen, a skiffle band formed by a teenage John Lennon, played there in this early incarnation.
Because skiffle come out of jazz, they sort of tolerated skiffle.
Yeah, it was regarded as a form of jazz, so it was tolerated in the Cavern.
But it was in 1961, by which time the Quarrymen had evolved into the Beatles and the Cavern had become a rock and roll hotbed, that this basement in a Liverpool backstreet started to become a place where people's lives could change forever.
The first time we came down to see another band called Dale Roberts and the Jaywalkers, because we heard that he could sing like Cliff Richard and the band could play like the Shadows. So we saw them, and when we got up to get out, they said, this other band's coming on now called the Beatles.
He didn't speak when he came on, he just started singing straight away. Pete was so loud and the whole sound was so different.
The Beatles came on and I wanted to be in that band. I wanted to be in a band like them. I wanted to play here.
They were such a hard, driving, virile kind of force on a stage, you know, and that was very attractive to everybody who saw it.
Early 60s Liverpool was awash with hopeful young groups playing American cover versions. But almost instantly, the firm favourites of the Cavern regulars were the scruffy quartet with a terrible pun in their band name and no obvious lead singer.
A lot of the people who came, if they didn't like George, it didn't matter, because they liked Paul. And if they didn't like Paul, they would like John. And if they didn't like John, they would like George. You know, it was 3 lead singers.
Lennon's voice, I remember particularly, that pleading voice, Dizzy Dizzy Miss Lizzie, which he just sort of tore apart as a song, really.
John, very sort of sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek, but friendly. Paul was, as ever, PR man of the group, would be fluttering his eyelashes at all the girls.
Even though John was the leader on stage and cracking gags and things like that, Paul was really the singer. He could do all Little Richard songs.
Well, a song to John, with Paul hit his Sally, he saw Mary coming and he doesn't give me any.
To hear Paul rip into Long Tall Sally and stuff like that, you know, I think, geez, where did that voice come from?
And completing the classic early Cavern-era Beatles lineup of John, Paul, George and Pete. Mean, moody, magnificent, Pete Best.
I mean, he was a hell of a loud bass drummer, and he just used to lock in with McCartney's bass.
The sound that they had, Pete was very, very crucial to that sound. And that was the sound that made them so popular here.
He was moody, he didn't speak, he didn't ever say anything.
He was just shy, wasn't he? He was
Yeah,
shy.
he sort of looked down under his eyes at you and always lovely. Yeah.
It was definitely a James Dean situation, you know, where girls would just wait for him to smile, and he never did.
In those days, I had to crank out a solid beat. If the girls were trying to make me smile, you know, I had my head down, I'm concentrating on what I'm doing. Now and again, I give a little grin.
A special bond was formed between the 4 Beatles and the teenagers paying to see them. And that was cemented in the informal atmosphere of the now legendary Cavern lunchtime sessions.
And it was great because the kids would come from work in the lunch break, come down here and have a hot dog and a Coke.
They played 2 spots. It was 12 to 1, and then 1:15 to 2:15. And the best spot was the second spot. So I always tried to get my lunch a little bit late.
And I would run from where I worked and got down here, watched the show, tried to hang around as long as I could at the end, have a chat at the coffee bar at the back.
And it was very, very relaxed because you could just shout up to them and ask them to play different numbers, and they messed about on stage.
Money don't get everything it's due.
The thing about the Cavern was because it was a small place, because it was where the in crowd used to go. All the same people used to go there all the time.
I reckon I must have seen the Beatles maybe 100, 150 times.
The interaction with the fans, they would chat, they knew everyone's name.
You really did know that you were watching history being made. You knew that something incredible was going to have to happen. You didn't know then that it was going to be something that was going to touch the whole of the world and change things forever.
The Merseybeat scene was about to explode.
There were 350 groups, and the Cavern, this became their temple, their holy of holies.
But some would be left behind.
The reality of the situation hit me. Good God, I'm no longer with the band.
That's what I want.
It's 50 years since the Beatles played for the first time at the Liverpool club that will always be connected with their name, the Cavern. But as well as hundreds of sweaty afternoons and nights there, the Beatles had another home from home, Hamburg. And playing long sessions in the exotic nightclubs there also formed a big part of their apprenticeship.
When we came back to Liverpool, and instead of playing 6-7 hours a night, all we had to do was compress it and play an hour. You've got all that energy pent up, and it just exploded. And of course, the kids had never seen anything like that before.
Returning to the Cavern in summer 1961, after a 3-month Hamburg stint, the Beatles were a battle-hardened unit, with a sharp new image to boot.
They came back in black leather.
They had leather bomber jackets, black turtleneck sweater. Black leather pants and pointed Italian shoes.
The new look was modelled on one of the Beatles' rock and roll heroes.
We wanted to be like Gene Vincent, you know, we wanted to be rockers. What became stuff that we'd wear for knocking around became our stage gear, basically. We lived in it. We wore it on stage, we wore it off stage. So leathers became a trademark with us.
Hard on the heels of the leather look came a new mop-top hairstyle, for the front three anyway. Soon to be adopted the world over, the Cavernites were unsure about it at first.
Nobody wore their hair forward apart from, you know, unfortunate kids at school who got their hair cut by their dads using a pudding basin. And there was a kid on our estate, and he, very early on, after seeing the Beatles, combed his hair forward. He got beaten up on our estate. I mean, it was that, you know, it was that odd a thing to do.
But the biggest breakthrough for the Beatles was that in Hamburg they had cut their first record. They had provided backing on the rocked-up version of a kid's favourite, sung by Tony Sheridan, an expat Brit, big in Germany. And this was to have a seismic effect on the Beatles' career back home. Enter Brian Epstein, owner of Liverpool's foremost record shop at the time, Nems.
Brian always said he could get a record anywhere in the world. It might take a long time. And we kept getting asked for this record by the Beatles. We got it. We sold boxes and boxes and boxes of it. One day, Brian came into Nems and he said, "Alistair, do you remember that band that we sold all those records for, the Beatles?" So I said yes. He said, "Well, they're playing at the Cavern Club."
One Thursday lunchtime in November 1961, 9 months after the Beatles' Cavern debut, Epstein and Taylor made the 2-minute walk from the record shop to see them play.
I remember the day Brian Epstein came down to the Cavern. We were here then, it was a lunchtime, and Bob Woolard announced over the microphone, "Please welcome Mr. Epstein from Nems."
Sweet little 16, she got the grown-up blues.
And I remember actually thinking how old Brian looked at the time, you know, because we were so young ourselves. And I think he was 27 or something when he came down here.
She'll have to change a
It's quite very posh, dressed very well, immaculately dressed, and just a businessman.
He was awfully posh. He sort of had never been with the plebs like us. And he came down and all these children down here dancing and smoking. But he loved the raunchiness and the aggression.
At the end, Paul announced that they'd like to close with a number that he and John had written. It's called Hello, Little Girl.
Hello, little girl. Hello, little girl.
And I thought, if they can write songs as good as that, you know, and I thought no more. That was just casual thought in my own head. We just put our head round the door, Brian did, and just all he said was, you know, "This is my assistant, Alistair." And they just, I think they said, "You know, what brings you here?" And we just said, "Thought you were very good. Bye." It was as quick and as simple as that. Then we went to Peacock's, for lunch. Brian says, "You know, what do you think of them?" And I said, "I think they're absolutely diabolical, but magic, absolutely fabulous." Out of the blue, he just said, think I could manage them.
The answer was a resounding yes. And from early 1962, with an ambitious new manager at the helm, life for the Beatles started to change in more ways than one.
He started doing what we call nice bookings. And he said, well, this leather gear has got to go.
So rock and roll leather was out, and showbiz suits were in.
When you look back, they were nice suits. They weren't the glitzy gold army things that, people were wearing. They were dark blue, mohair, nice cut on them, white shirts, black ties. So, yeah, we looked dapper.
Under Epstein's management, record labels were being courted, although without much success at first. And more shows outside Liverpool meant the rest of Britain started to discover what all the fuss was about. But a more controversial change was also coming, one that took the regulars of the Cavern by surprise.
We got called to Brian Epstein's office one day. As we got up there, we opened, Pete Best came out the lift and pushed us out the way. And we went, hello, how you doing? And he just wouldn't speak to us.
Looked right through us.
Pushed us out the way and walked past. And then the secretary came out and said, Brian's can't see you now.
Awful sorry, he'll explain later.
Yeah, he'll explain later. And apparently he was so upset about the whole thing.
He just sacked Pete.
He just sacked Pete Best.
Just a bombshell being dropped on me, basically. No forewarning. Called into, Eppie's office. He wasn't a normal, cool, calm, placid Brian. Because I'd had meetings with Brian before. I'd handled the business side of things, and I just thought, OK, it's another brain-picking session. Here we go. What's it like playing for this promoter? Should we put the price up? The usual stuff. We walked in, happy as Larry. Brian was a little bit apprehensive and talked around the subject for a while, and then he just said, Pete, I got bad news for you. Don't really know how to turn around and tell you. The boys want you out, and it's already been arranged that Ringo would join the band on Saturday. And that was the bombshell.
After 2 years and more than 1,000 shows in Hamburg and Liverpool, Pete Best was out, and Ringo Starr from Rory Storm and the Hurricanes was in.
And I accepted it, and it was only really when I got back home again that the reality of the situation hit me. Good God, I'm no longer with the band.
As to the reason why, there are many well-worn theories, from jealousy of Pete's female following, to his not adopting the Beatles' haircut, to his quietness on stage.
There's that many conspiracy theories over it. I stopped worrying about it many, many years ago, Life goes on. If you keep looking back over your shoulder all the time, then you will end up bitter and twisted, but there's more to life than that, Yeah, it happened, but take it on the chin and get on with your life.
Peter gone, but the Beatles' juggernaut powered on, with TV companies starting to pick up on the buzz from the Cavern. So as it happened, Ringo's first lunchtime session as a member of the Beatles in August 1962 was filmed by an ITV crew. It's the only footage of the Beatles at the Cavern and captures irate Pete Best fans, furious that some other guy was occupying the drum stool.
Mixed emotions, obviously, because everyone loved Pete. People were booing and stuff like that.
Audience were chanting, Pete Best forever, Ringo never.
For a brief period in summer 1962, the former Cavern idols found themselves the villains of the piece in the eyes of the devotees of their former drummer.
George came in with a big black eye. And what's happened to you? He said, oh, someone's annoyed that we've sacked Pete, so they give me a punch.
I don't know whether he was any better or worse than Ringo, to be honest, but personality-wise, Ringo fitted a lot better, I think.
Because the other three were quite extrovert, and Pete wasn't. And Ringo was the clown as well, and he did fit in with the Beatles image.
With Ringo, he's so cute. He just grew on people, so then he was accepted.
Once Ringo had won over the doubters, the classic Beatles lineup was in place. But gone for good were the days of the Beatles as a kind of Cavern house band, playing 3 lunchtime sessions a week. As 1962 drew to an end, TV bookings were on the increase, and most crucially, a record contract had been secured with EMI.
Love, love me do.
The Beatles were taking off.
You know I love you.
Cause for celebration at the Cavern? Well, not exactly.
So please, love me do.
If any band was going to make it, I thought it would be the Beatles. But when it happened, it was like, hang on, they're going.
Love, love me do. You know I love you.
It felt to me that they would just stay in Liverpool. I mean, nobody got a record contract in those days. You had to go to London and sing songs written by Lionel Barnes or something like that, you know, to get a record contract. So I thought the Beatles were going to be here forever.
I was aware of a reluctance of the girls to buy Love Me Do because they didn't want the Beatles to leave Liverpool.
Hang on, we buy this, or if they get famous, they'll leave the Cavern, and what we do then?
Love me do. You know I love you.
But I couldn't resist. I worked over the record shop as well, so I couldn't resist, could I?
So
I've got a very nice signed copy of that still today.
love me do.
A lot of people were disappointed, yeah, because London had their own people, you know, like Cliff Richard and Marty Wilde. And that's all we had in Liverpool, really, the Beatles. So when there was talk about them going, you know, I just unhooked myself and went and done something else.
Some of the fans have been saying that, you know, they feel that you've deserted them. What do you feel about that?
They're mainly the ones that never came to us. The people that are moaning about us not being here are people that never even came to see us when we were here. You know, we could count on our fingers the original fans we had here, the ones that really followed us.
Without the Beatles, the fans would find themselves protesting to keep the band's spiritual home alive.
So we got all the chairs, and like there was, we say, the entrance there, and we just filled it with chairs.
But would it all be in vain?
Isn't that typical, to knock something iconic down?
Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you.
1963 saw Britain gripped by Beatlemania. As hysteria levels surged ever higher nationwide, time spent by the Beatles in their Liverpool hometown became ever more scarce. But in August 1963, a triumphant final return was planned to the place where it all began, the Cavern.
The final gig here, we couldn't get in. I packed. We could not get in the doorway. It was absolutely packed.
It was just horrendous, really. It was too full. Too full and a bit frightening.
Well, she was just 17, you know what I mean.
That was a strange night because when we were in the dressing room with the Beatles and they were sitting around all with long faces, and I remember John kept saying, you know, we shouldn't have done this, you know, we shouldn't have come back to do it. It's all going to go wrong. We went on, did our spot. It went great. We came off. Anyway, they went on, didn't they? Yeah. And with how long was it?
After one number, one number.
They did one number, and all the lights went out. Everything fused. And John was shouting, I knew we shouldn't have done it. I knew we shouldn't have come back to do this.
And they went into a little ad-lib, John and Paul. And we didn't know what it was. We thought it was an old 20s song. We only found out like 3 years later when they did Sgt. Pepper that it was when I get older, losing my head, many years from that. They actually did it on the last gig on the Cavern here.
Will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine.
We never did get them back. Despite what Brian Epstein said, he said, you shall have them again, Bob. Of course, we never got them back again.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. I think you'll understand.
The Beatles had outgrown their old stamping ground. The kind of fun they used to have down in the deep, dark cavern was now more likely to take place under TV lights, swapping witty lines with entertainment A-listers of the day.
The television people said, would you like to come to Manchester and do a quick interview with the Beatles?
Every time he's down to me.
And we just started chatting about different things. I said, well, I think I'd like to have a go at this pop singer myself.
Have you no ambitions to form a group yourself? Love with the boys. Yeah. Kenny and the Cockroaches. No, I mean, Kenny and the Cockroaches. The only thing is I'd have to change my name, you see.
I couldn't just be Ken Dodd, could I? I'd have to have like you're the Beatles.
I'd have to have a name like Cliff or Rock, something earthy. Well, I don't know, eh?
Cliff Dodd.
No.
Rock Dodd.
No, let's invite suggestions for an earthy name for me.
Yeah, well, what about that, fellow?
Eh?
Sod.
They were still able to be down to earth. They were still able to be for Liverpool lads.
But the Cavern success story wouldn't be just about the Beatles.
People in London had heard about you. They'd heard about the Beatles. Let's get up to Liverpool. And rest is history, isn't it?
Once the floodgates had been opened, a wave of other Mersey bands would sweep all before them.
I mean, Liverpool went crazy. Beatles, number one. What's number one? The Beatles, then us and the Sages. And it was all Liverpool in the charts, and everybody was over the moon.
With their own secret care. So Mary, across the Mersey.
We were blasé, but we just accepted it. Oh, another Mersey beat band at number one.
The place I love.
This is Liverpool, this is what we do.
More and more groups from outside Liverpool were drawn to the club that made acts famous. Mancunians like the Hollies and Herman's Hermits regularly made the short journey westward. While others, like Londoners the Kinks, travelled from further afield. When the Kinks made their Cavern debut in 1964, that great English songwriter, Ray Davies, was still reliant on cover versions, like his take on Little Richard's Long Tall Sally. By the mid-60s, a pilgrimage to the Beatles' former musical home was a must for up-and-coming stars like the Kinks. But on the rare occasions that the Beatles themselves returned to Liverpool, a visit to the Cavern was no longer on the agenda. July 10th, 1964, saw Liverpool host the northern premiere of the Beatles' first feature film, and the frenzied scenes of fainting teenagers that had been sweeping the country were about to engulf their hometown.
So why on earth should I moan? 'Cause when I get you alone, you know I'll be here.
For some reason, I'd forgotten that it was the premiere of Odd Day's Night. And I came up, rushing up the underground steps. And I just couldn't move. There was this fantastic kind of wall. And then I realised, oh, this must be for the Beatles.
Any moment now, the Beatles will be coming on the balcony.
We were going on the balcony and we were just in the room at the back and we went near, to look. And my mouth fell open. I couldn't believe the amount of people in Castle Street. It was just shocking.
I was probably halfway down Castle Street. It was a hell of a crush.
Still, the casualties mount up. They've been put at about 100 by the St John ambulance men. They're falling like ninepins. Liverpool's never seen anything like this.
Beatles came out and they looked like 4 puppets with their suits on and their hair's just so. They look so different from how I remember them. Completely changed. They look like well-brought-up, respectable little boys, not what I remember.
Less than kind of 2 years previously, myself, along with a few hundred, maybe a few thousand people, absolutely loved them, but suddenly this entire city was brought to a standstill.
But for all the continued success of its most famous sons, Merseybeat was on the wane, and so was the Cavern.
People try to put us to down. Talking about my generation.
London bands like The Who, Cavern performers themselves in 1965, were on the up. Liverpool was becoming old hat.
What went wrong? The Liverpool bands stopped having hit records. You know, the only ones who carried on having hit records were the Beatles, really.
Until one February evening in 1966, the staff gathered to hear a dramatic announcement from the Cavern club owner, Ray McFall.
One night, Sunday night, Ray McFall comes down and says, the bailiffs will be here tomorrow morning. Keep open all night. Let anybody in for the last night.
We went round all the clubs in Liverpool and we said, the Cavern's closing tonight, but we're not going to close. If you want to come down, we're going to stay playing here till we get thrown out.
A few of us got together and we decided that we'd barricade ourselves in. So we got all the chairs and like there was, we say the entrance there out and just filled it with chairs and thought we were very brave.
We were down here for hours. The groups played for free. There was everyone down there, Crying Shames, Rory Storm, my man friend Billy Butler was here. All the hideaways, all played, just kept playing, jamming.
And towards the morning, I went on stage to tell the kids, when the bailiffs arrive, resist them. But when the police arrive, that's it.
Next morning, in came the bailiffs and the police.
Time for the evicted Cavernites to take to the streets.
We led a protest march around town. There were sheets held on poles with painted on, keep the Cavern open and stuff like that. And there must have been 600, 700, 800 of us marched all through the city centre. And I always remember we sang the Yardbird song, Still I'm Sad. It was easy going, ah. It seemed the right thing for it. When we got into Matthew Street, I got hoisted up on top of the Cavern doorway and we laid a wreath there. And that wreath stayed there till it died.
People power was to win the day. The kids' campaign got its reward when new investment saw a revamped Cavern Club open in style in summer 1966.
Where's the most famous number 10 in the world? Downing Street? Not on your Nelly, say Liverpudlians. It's 10 Matthew Street, the address of the Cavern, where the Beatles took the pop world by storm. A new-look, super with it extended Cavern was being opened by the Premier. And here he was, in the cellar, where it all began.
They cut the ribbon, of course, and then we did a little set.
Over now to those local idols, the Hideaways.
The Cavern was embarking on a new chapter.
We came on the second wave. Those 6, 7 years younger we were, that's the difference. But the Cavern was still, to me, still great.
We started making changes then as well. We opened another floor upstairs, we had a boutique upstairs, we served food upstairs. I was still playing music downstairs, because we still had some good bands on.
As the 60s reached their end, the sounds floating up the steps into Matthew Street were growing ever heavier. Joining the likes of Rod Stewart and Elton John, who both trod the famous boards before making it big, were Queen, who played one of their earliest gigs at the Cavern in 1970.
The Beatles really were our heroes, and playing the Cavern
was quite special for us. The place itself is fascinating because, of course, you think it's going to be something rather grand because it's world famous, but it's tiny and you're playing under these little arches. It's like sort of being in an underpass, really.
But as the new decade wore on, the Cavern seemed to many a relic of a bygone age.
If, like me, you're old enough to remember the big three, but too young to have qualified as a teddy boy, then you should feel a twinge of nostalgia today. Because at the end of the month, they're closing down the Cavern Club here in Liverpool. In fact, they're going to build an underground railway under what probably is the most famous shrine to Merseymania.
Maybe just like everything else runs its course in history, you know, like the Roman Empire. I know that's a much bigger thing, but things sometimes just run the course and people don't want them anymore.
We actually couldn't believe it. We thought, what a stupid thing. We thought if the Cavern would have been in America, it would have been a shrine.
It breaks your heart in two to know she's been untrue.
Isn't that typical, to knock something iconic down and, you know, replace it with a railway shaft?
In June 1973, the Cavern was demolished.
There weren't any marches or any mass protests or anything like that. It was just accepted that was the end of an era.
Start to weep, then say goodbye.
It was supposed to be getting closed because there was going to be a shaft drilled for the underground railway. I don't think they ever did it. They just filled it in.
Setting suns before they fall.
Well, I just thought somebody's made a mistake. I thought it's silly. They could have made a fortune out of the Cavern. Americans loved it. Everybody loved it. Just seemed a silly thing to do.
After all.
When tourists visited the iconic Matthew Street site, all that was left for them to take photos of was a car park where the Cavern once stood. It seemed that the Cavern story was over. But was it? On December the 9th, 1980, Britain awoke to bad news.
He's not dead. They're just saying that to get people to leave. He's not dead. John Lennon can't be dead.
I think it was such a shock. To those of us who knew him, it was a shock. It was quite a surprise to realise the rest of the world felt the same. Strangers sort of crying and things like this, and it did sort of make us all wake up a little bit, really.
It was probably the assassination of John Lennon in 1980, which I think was the catalyst Liverpool became somewhere to do a pilgrimage to.
But devotees seeking the legendary Cavern, where it all began for John Lennon and his fellow Beatles, were in for a shock. All they found was a rubble-strewn car park. There was no Merseybeat Mecca to visit. Although confusingly, there was a club on the other side of the street with the old Cavern sign outside it.
The then owner, Roy Adams, decided that he wasn't going to let the Cavern be buried underground, so what he did was reopen a premises across the street and called it the Cavern Club, where it remained for a couple of years. The club changed its name from the Cavern to the Revolution and subsequently changed its name for a third time to Eric's. And in 1976, you walked in this doorway into a club that became Liverpool's iconic punk club.
Just meters away from where the Cavern once stood was a new club, housing the musical stars of a new generation.
Nice girl's not one with a defect, cellophane shrink wrap so correct. red rocks under illegal lakes.
The Eric's flame burned briefly, and its doors closed for the last time in 1982. But by then, plans were afoot to bring the most famous club name of them all back to Matthew Street. The Cavern would rise again.
Immediately opposite this doorway now, you have the entrance to the new Cavern Club, which was rebuilt and reopened in 1984. So we're about 22 foot underground, about 8 foot deeper than it was in its heyday. This is the Cavern Club today, and it's been rebuilt exactly as the original looked. We even have the original bricks on the ceiling and the archways. People walk in the door today. They expect to hear the music that was familiar to them of that period in the 60s, and that's what we do.
The Cavern is lower than it was. It's different, it's right angles to the old place. I remember the Cavern, but it's a very good facsimile, it really is. And it smells better too.
Still a venue that a lot of successful artists want to play now.
The new Cavern also boasts a second stage where contemporary acts play. Today, 50 years after the Beatles played their first gig in the most famous club in the world, the Cavern lives on. But with the passing of the years, many of the leading lights of the Cavern's heyday are no longer with us, and the memories this iconic venue evokes are bittersweet.
I look at you all, see the lover that's sleeping, while my guitar gently weeps.
So many people gone now. And the main ones, 2 Beatles, 2 wives, all the parents, you know. That's life, isn't it? Time moves on.
Gently weeps.
Seems hard to believe that, you know, I'm still alive and that 2 of the Beatles are dead. If they didn't become famous, they'd probably be alive, I suppose. They used to chain smoke on stage, you know, and I think that's what's happened to George. I don't have to explain about John. If he wasn't in New York, then he might still be alive.
They bought and sold you.
Besides George, you know, and John, of course, there's a lot of other bands that were resident here that are not with us anymore.
A lot of great friends who have gone that we first saw here.
My guitar gently weeps.
Recent years have seen the passing of key figures in the story of the Cavern's golden era.
We must surely be learning. Still my guitar.
But the music first heard at the Cavern lives on.
We've still got Paul.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And to mark the millennium, Paul McCartney made an emotional return to where it all began.
She was just 17. You know what I mean. And the way she
He stood there like schoolboys again, you know, he was just terrific. And that's where he belonged, the Cavern.
How could I dance with another? Oh, and I saw her standing there.
Even though it wasn't the original stage, it was still a great gig. And it was rock and roll.
I can see that before too long, I fall in love with her. I see.
The Cavern is so famous around the world now. You go to any country in the world, and what do they want to talk about? The Cavern, the Beatles, where it all started.
While the reborn Cavern goes from strength to strength, its greatest days are preserved in the memories of those who were there. Memories of the Beatles stepping onto its tiny stage, of the Mersey sound conquering the pop world,
Oh, I'll be there.
and of DJ Bob Wooler spinning the schmaltzy ballad that always marked the end of another amazing Cavern night.
To answer your unspoken prayer.
The Bobby Darin disc called I'll Be There.
When the little things you're doing.
That was always the last record he played, and you knew there was no hope after that. You had to go.
Don't you worry, darling, I'll be there.
The most famous club, I think, in the world is the Cavern. And I can't really see any other club taking it over now because conditions have all changed, and for a small club, I think this is the place, and it always will be the place.
And wish you luck on your new affair.
I love the fact it's been recreated, and it's fantastic that it's there for all those generations who weren't in the delightfully fortunate position that I and a few others was in of being in the original Cavern.
And don't you worry, darling, I'll be there.
We've come so far now. We're 50 years on from when the Cavern opened. I wonder when it will eventually fade away. Will it ever fade away? Certainly not in my lifetime.
That there is someone who cares. So if you
What a memory. I mean, kids today say, I wish I'd lived through that time, you know. And to think, well, you know, I did.
don't you worry, darling, I'll be there.
Refusing to believe it was an accident, Ruth is determined to find out the truth about Alice's death. Our chilling drama continues. Marchlands is tomorrow at 9. Next, international football highlights. Denmark versus England.